The woman never looked twice at the dog. That was her first mistake. Her second was raising her hand. It was the kind of October afternoon that makes Canadians forget winter is coming. Warm enough for shirt sleeves, cool enough for a jacket. The sky over Victoria, British Columbia, was the sort of pale blue that only shows up in photographs and on days when you weren't expecting it. The Garry Oak Preserve Charity Classic was exactly the Saturday calendar in Victoria's Rockland neighborhood. Dog Agility Fundraiser. Sponsored tents. Craft beer from a local brewery nobody outside the city had heard of. Volunteers in green vests, checking names off clipboards. Children running between the legs of adults who weren't paying attention. It was, by all appearances, a perfectly harmless afternoon. Logan didn't want to be there. He'd agreed to it 6 weeks ago, during a phone call with his younger sister Claire when he was still deployed, and the concept of a Saturday afternoon in October felt as abstract as the surface of the moon. She'd said the words charity dog show, and he'd said sure because it was easier than explaining that he didn't make plans. Plans were what happened to other people. But he was home now, 3 weeks of leave. And Claire had a way of holding him to things. So here he was, Logan Hurst, 38 years old, Master Seaman with Joint Task Force 2, Canada's Special Operations Unit, on temporary leave from a deployment he wasn't allowed to describe at dinner parties. 6'1", quiet jaw, eyes that had learned to count exits before they learned anything else, and beside him, on a short leather lead, walked Sergeant. That was the dog's name, not a call sign, not a nickname, just Sergeant. A 4-year-old German shepherd with a black saddle marking, amber eyes, and the kind of calm that made strangers step back without knowing why. Sergeant had served 2 tours alongside Logan as a military working dog before a shrapnel injury to his left hind leg ended his operational career. The CF had cleared him for adoption. Logan had signed the paperwork the same day. They had an understanding, the two of them. Logan didn't ask Sergeant to perform. Sergeant didn't ask Logan to talk about things he'd seen. It worked. Claire waved from across the grass. She was standing near the registration table with her husband, Patrick, and their daughter, Rosie, who was 5 years old and currently attempting to braid the ear of a very patient Labrador. "You came," Claire said, like she wasn't entirely sure he would. "I said I would," Logan said. "You say a lot of things from Afghanistan. It was Molly." "Right." She hugged him. She was careful around the topic of where he'd been, the way you're careful around a bruise you can't see. Rosie's been asking about Sergeant all week. Rosie had abandoned the Labrador and was now standing 3 feet away from Sergeant, studying him with the scientific intensity of a 5-year-old who had done her research. "Can I pet him?" she asked. "Ask him," Logan said. Rosie looked at Sergeant. Sergeant looked at Rosie. Then Sergeant sat down, which was as close to an invitation as he gave anyone. Rosie stepped forward and put both hands on the dog's broad head. Sergeant closed his eyes. Logan watched this and felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't known was tight. The agility course was set up at the far end of the preserve grounds. Jump poles, weave poles, a tunnel in orange and blue. The dogs who competed ranged from a border collie that looked like it had been practicing since birth to a basset hound that appeared to be competing on principle alone. The crowd was the kind that Victoria produces in abundance: retired professionals, younger couples with expensive strollers, older women in wide-brimmed hats, men in fleece vests who had strong opinions about single malt. There was money here, not the showy kind. The quiet, inherited kind that doesn't need to announce itself because it already owns the building. Logan stood near the fence with Sergeant and watched the border collie finish a run in 41 seconds. People clapped. A child cheered. The announcer said something warm and forgettable into a handheld microphone. It was fine. It was all perfectly fine. Then Constance Albright arrived. She came in the way people come in when they've decided the event started the moment they walked through the gate. Late 40s, cream-colored blazer with the collar turned up, dark hair pulled back, with what was probably a $200 clip. She had the particular walk of someone who had never once in her life waited for a table, Behind her came an assistant, a young woman in black, who was carrying 3 things simultaneously and managing none of them well. And beside Constance, on a pale blue lead that matched nothing in the natural world, walked a Doberman named, as Logan would later learn from the program, Imperatore. Imperatore was a beautiful dog. Not Sargent's kind of beautiful. The kind that comes with papers and a handler and a very specific idea of its own importance. Constance stopped near the registration desk and said something to the volunteer that made the volunteer's smile go rigid. Logan noticed this. He noticed most things. He didn't think much of it. Rich people had a way of turning every transaction into a negotiation. He'd seen it before. It usually passed. The afternoon moved forward. Rosie ate a cookie from the baking table and got icing on Sargent's ear, which Sargent accepted with dignity. Patrick bought 2 local IPAs and handed one to Logan, who held it without drinking much because he'd learned, over years, that crowds and alcohol required more recovery time than he had on a 3-week leave. Claire walked the perimeter with him, while Sargent moved at Logan's left side, loose-leaded, reading the grass the way dogs read everything. "Are you sleeping?" Claire asked. "Some. That's not a yes. It's not a no either." She let it go. She was good at that. Knowing when to push and when to let the silence do what it needed to do. They watched a golden retriever attempt the tunnel and get distracted by a smell halfway through. The crowd laughed. The handler shrugged with the resigned grace of someone who had accepted, long ago, that dogs would be dogs. Constance's Doberman ran next. It was, by any honest assessment, an excellent run. Imperatore moved through the course with precision, jumps clean, weave, poles fluid, tunnel fast. Constance stood at the edge of the course with her arms crossed and said nothing during the run, no cheering, no encouragement, just watching with the expression of someone reviewing a quarterly report. The time came up, 38 seconds. The crowd applauded. Constance uncrossed her arms and said something to her assistant. The assistant wrote it down. The trouble started at the water station. It was a simple setup, a long folding table, a row of water bowls for dogs, bottles of water for people. Volunteer run, the kind of thing that just exists at these events, unremarked and appreciated. Sargent had been moving for 2 hours. He was trained to work in heat far worse than this, but Logan was attentive to the dog the way he was attentive to everything. He stopped at the table. Sargent drank. Constance approached from the left. She had Imperatore on the lead. The Doberman was calm, ears forward, curious, no aggression. A well-trained dog. The problem was the positioning. Sargent was at the middle bowl. Imperatore moved toward the same bowl, and for a moment the 2 dogs were nose level, assessing. It was nothing. Dogs do this constantly, a breath, an acknowledgement. Then they move on. But Constance didn't see it as nothing. "Can you move your animal?" she said. She wasn't looking at Logan. She was looking at Sargent the way you look at something in the road. Logan glanced at her. "He's almost done. I asked you to move him, and I told you he's almost done." The volunteer at the table looked between them with the helpless expression of someone who did not get paid enough for this. Constance made a sound. Not a word. A sound. The kind that communicates, without any ambiguity, that she found the situation beneath her. She reached into her bag and produced a leather-wrapped crop. The kind sometimes used in dog handling. Decorative. Firm. "He needs to learn his place," she said, and she brought it down. Not hard, but not soft either. The crop caught Sargent across the left flank, the same side that still carried a faint scar from shrapnel 4,000 kilometers away, in a place that didn't have a name on a tourist map. Sargent didn't yelp. He didn't snap. He turned his head and looked at Constance with the amber eyes that had looked at worse things than her, and he was still. Logan was not still. He moved 1 step. Just 1. Between Constance and the dog. His voice, when it came, was quiet enough that only she could hear it. "You do not touch my dog." Constance held the crop and met his eyes for the first time. She had the look of someone recalculating, but not far enough. "Your dog was in the way of mine," she said. "If you can't control your animal at a public event—" "You struck him," Logan said. "I corrected him. You struck my dog." A pause. "You don't know what he is." I can see exactly what he is, Constance said. A large, undisciplined, he's a military working dog, Logan said, retired 2 operational tours. He has more hours under fire than any person on these grounds. Another pause. And you hit him. Something shifted in Constance's expression. A flicker, gone before it landed. That's very impressive, she said. But this is a charity event, not a military installation. And your dog, we're done talking, Logan said. He turned away. He crouched beside Sargent, ran his hand along the dog's flank, slow and deliberate, assessing. Sargent's breathing was even. No wince, no shift. The old scar was intact. Logan exhaled once through his nose. The volunteer was looking at him with wide eyes. A woman nearby, gray hair, kind face, a beagle on a lead, had watched the whole exchange. She said nothing, but she also didn't look away. There are moments that pass without consequence, and there are moments that set something in motion that cannot be stopped. This is how consequence works. Not with a warning. Not with a signal. It simply arrives, and the only question is whether you've earned what it brings. The afternoon rolled on. Constance moved to the far side of the grounds with her assistant and her Doberman and her cream blazer, and Logan let the distance settle. He wasn't angry, exactly. He was something quieter than angry, something that didn't need expression. Claire found him 20 minutes later. I heard something happened at the water station, she said. Nothing happened. She looked at him, then at Sargent. Logan, a woman, struck Sargent with a crop. I told her not to. We moved on. Claire pressed her lips together. Who doesn't matter? It matters to. Claire. He said her name the way you say a name when you need someone to stop. She stopped. He's fine. She looked at Sargent, who was currently resting his chin on Rosie's shoe while Rosie stood very still and tried not to breathe, convinced that if she moved he'd leave. Okay, Claire said. They didn't talk about it again. The junior agility run began at 3 o'clock. This was the part of the afternoon that existed for the children. Smaller jumps, wider tunnels. Handlers standing closer, arms open, ready to catch. The dogs who ran here were patient ones. Therapy dogs, family pets, the kind of animals who understood that today was not about performance. Rosie wanted to run with Sargent. Logan looked at his sister. Claire gave him the look that meant, she's been talking about this since Tuesday. Sargent doesn't do competition, Logan said to Rosie. It's not competition, Rosie said, with 5-year-old certainty. It's for fun. Logan crouched to her level. He's a working dog, Rosie. He doesn't do fun the same way you do. Does he do fun at all? Logan considered this. He does his own version. What if I run with him and we don't try to win? You can't enter without a registered dog. Rosie looked at Sargent. He's a dog. He's not registered for this event. Is there a rule that says unregistered dogs can't run for fun at the end? Logan looked up at the volunteer coordinator, a teenager in a green vest who had clearly overheard this entire negotiation and looked like she was trying very hard not to side with the 5-year-old. Is there? Logan asked. I mean, the volunteer said, technically the junior fun run is kind of open, if the handler signs a waiver. Logan looked at Rosie. Rosie looked at Sargent. Sargent stood up. Fine, Logan said. They ran last, Rosie and Sargent, with Logan walking alongside the fence so Sargent could see him. The crowd had thinned, but the people who remained had a warmth that the earlier crowd lacked. People who stayed until the end were always the right kind of people. Rosie ran with her arms out for balance, sneakers slapping the grass. Sargent ran beside her, not ahead, not behind. Beside. He cleared the first jump at exactly Rosie's pace. He waited, actually waited, at the tunnel entrance until she went in first. Then he followed. The crowd made a sound. Not applause, something softer. The sound of people watching something they weren't expecting to feel moved by. Sargent cleared the last jump. Rosie threw both arms around his neck and buried her face in his fur. Logan stood at the fence with his hands in his jacket pockets and said nothing. The gray-haired woman with the beagle was standing nearby. She looked at Logan. That dog, she said, has a good soul. Yes, Logan said. He does. What happened next was not something Logan anticipated. He should have, perhaps. He'd spent enough years reading environments, predicting outcomes. But he'd made the mistake of relaxing. He was carrying Rosie back toward the parking area when it started. Rosie had fallen asleep on his shoulder, the particular sudden unconsciousness of small children who have simply run out of day. Logan had her across both arms, careful, her sneaker dangling. Sergeant walked beside him, off lead now, loose at his left hip. The preserve had a small ornamental pond near the east entrance. Decorative, maybe 60 centimeters deep, surrounded by a low stone border that existed, as most ornamental pond borders do, at exactly the wrong height for a running child. The child was maybe 6 years old. He was running at full speed in that loose-limbed, abandoned way that children run when they've stopped thinking about their feet. He was chasing something. A ball, a bird, a thought, and he wasn't watching the stone border. Nobody was watching. The mother, Logan identified her 2 seconds before the fall, because he was always identifying people in relation to their children, was 20 meters away with her phone out, mid-conversation, back half-turned. The boy hit the border with his shin. Not a trip, a full, uncontrolled forward pitch. Arms not out in time, momentum carrying him directly over the edge. The pond was shallow enough that he wouldn't drown. It was deep enough that a 6-year-old, hitting face first, stunned, could inhale water before anyone reached him. Sergeant moved before Logan did. Sergeant was already in motion, 3 strides from a standing start, no command, no signal, just the dog reading the situation the way the dog read everything. Completely, immediately, without hesitation, he hit the water the same moment the boy did. The boy went face first. Sergeant was beside him before he sank. 140-pound dog trained in water extraction. He did not grab. He got under. He pushed. He got the boy's head above the surface and held position, treading, stable, until Logan vaulted the stone border with Rosie still somehow on his shoulder. He would never be able to fully explain the mechanics of this later, and reached into the water with one arm and pulled the boy clear. The mother was screaming. People were running. The boy coughed water, once, twice. Then he was crying, which Logan registered as an excellent sign. Sergeant pulled himself out of the pond and shook. 360 degrees of spray. The mother reached them. She was sobbing. She pulled the boy to her chest, and he cried harder into her neck, which is what children do when they're frightened, and then suddenly, overwhelmingly safe. Logan stood there with one wet sleeve, and Rosie still inexplicably on his other arm. She had woken up at some point, and was now watching everything with huge eyes and saying nothing. He looked at Sergeant. Sergeant looked back at him. His fur was dripping. His amber eyes were calm. "Good boy," Logan said. Sergeant sat down. The events that followed happened the way events follow emergencies. Quickly, then slowly, then all at once. A first aid volunteer arrived. The boy, his name, Logan learned, was Thomas. He was 6 years old. He had been chasing a Canada goose, was checked over and declared unhurt beyond a scraped shin, and a very dramatic story for school Monday. Thomas's mother, a woman named Sandra, and no, Logan would not give her the grace of extended description because grace was something you earned and she hadn't, stood with her son in her arms and breathed. She looked at Sergeant. Sergeant was still sitting, still wet, watching Thomas with the patience of something that knew it had done its job. "Is that your dog?" Sandra said. "Yes," Logan said. She looked at Sergeant for a long moment. Something moved across her face, then she pulled Thomas tighter and turned away. She didn't say thank you. Logan noticed this. He registered it, and then he let it go, because gratitude was not why Sergeant had moved. Sergeant had moved because a child was falling, and that was enough. But he noticed. The crowd that gathered was respectful, and then, in the way of crowds, became absorbed in its own retelling. People who had seen it described it to people who hadn't. The story changed shape with each telling. The gray-haired woman with the beagle found Logan near the parking entrance. "I saw the whole thing," she said, "from the very beginning." Logan said nothing. "The water station too," she said. "I saw what that woman did to your dog." Logan still said nothing. The woman had the kind of eyes that had seen enough decades to stop being impressed by most things. She looked at him with that quality. "You're not going to say anything?" she asked. "About which part?" "Either. Both." Logan looked toward where Sargent was sitting in the grass, still damp, while Rosie fed him a piece of cookie that she had somehow produced from her jacket pocket. "He doesn't need me to say anything," Logan said. "He knows what he did." The woman was quiet for a moment. "Your dog saved that boy's life," she said, "after the boy's mother stood by while someone hit him." Logan looked at her then. "Sandra wasn't at the water station." "No," the woman said, "but Constance was. And Constance is Sandra's sister." Logan was still. The woman gave him a look that said she knew exactly what she'd just handed him, and that she'd been deciding whether to do it for 20 minutes. "Her name is Constance Albright," the woman said. "She owns Albright Property Management, 300 residential units in Greater Victoria. She sits on the board of 2 community foundations, and she donated the main tent for this event today." She paused. And in approximately 15 minutes the woman continued. "She is receiving an award from the event committee at the closing ceremony for community leadership." Logan said nothing for 3 full seconds. "Thank you," he said finally. The woman nodded. She and her beagle walked away. Sometimes the truth does not need a champion. It needs only an audience. The closing ceremony was held at the main pavilion. A portable stage. A banner. Fold-out chairs that were mostly still occupied by the people who, as previously noted, stayed until the end. The event director, a man named Will, mid-50s, the organized kind, was at the microphone with a small plaque when Logan arrived with Sargent. He didn't push to the front. He stood at the edge of the crowd. Sargent sat at his left. Will was in the middle of introducing the award recipients when he noticed the crowd's attention begin to drift. Not dramatically, just the small collective shift of 100 people noticing something. They were noticing Sargent, still damp, black saddle marking dark with water, amber eyes forward. And they were noticing Logan beside him. Quiet, not performing. Will paused. The microphone caught a breath. In the audience, near the front, Constance had a plaque in her hands that hadn't been presented yet. "Before we continue," said a voice. And it was not Will's. It was Thomas's mother. Sandra stood up from her chair near the stage steps. Thomas was asleep across her lap, which is the only reason she was able to stand without dropping him. She handed him to the woman beside her, a stranger, and stepped forward. Her face was the face of someone who had been building to something for 15 minutes and had decided to stop waiting. "My son fell into the pond," Sandra said, "to no one and everyone. 20 minutes ago. He went over the edge and he went in face first, and that dog." She pointed at Sargent, her hand not quite steady. "That dog was in the water before any person moved." The crowd was silent. "I didn't say thank you," Sandra said. She was looking at Logan now. Her voice was level, but it cost her something to keep it that way. "I should have said thank you. I'm saying it now." She looked at Sargent. "Thank you," she said. Sargent regarded with amber eyes and said nothing because he was a dog. But he didn't look away either. Logan gave a short nod. Sandra sat back down. The crowd made that sound again, the soft one, the one that had nothing to do with performance. Will at the microphone cleared his throat. "I think," he said slowly, "that we may want to take a moment before the award presentation." He looked at Logan. "Is there anything you'd like to say about your dog?" "No," Logan said. Will waited. "He does his job," Logan said. "He's always done his job. He doesn't need a speech about it." A pause. "I would ask," Logan said, "that before we give community leadership awards, we think about what leadership actually looks like." He said it quietly. He wasn't looking at Constance. He didn't need to. Everyone else was. Constance Albright did not receive her award that afternoon. This was not because anyone prevented it. This was not because Logan said another word. This was simply because Will, after a brief and quietly stricken conversation with 2 committee members, announced that the Leadership Award presentation would be deferred to the next event. Deferral is a very Canadian way of doing something decisive. Constance sat with her plaque in its box and her cream blazer and her hands folded in her lap, and she said nothing. Imperatore lay at her feet, unaware that anything had happened because Imperatore was a dog and had the great advantage of not understanding social architecture. The assistant in black was typing something very quickly into her phone. The gray-haired woman with the beagle watched from 3 rows back. The truth, once it has an audience, does not go back in the box. What followed in the weeks after the Gary Oak Preserve Charity Classic was the kind of thing that happens now, in the age of phones and platforms, and people who film everything as a reflex. The gray-haired woman, her name was Patricia, though Logan wouldn't learn this until much later, had been filming from the moment Sargent entered the water. She hadn't planned to. She'd had her phone out to photograph her beagle, but she had the good instinct to keep recording. The clip was 43 seconds. It showed Sargent reaching Thomas first. It showed Logan coming over the wall. It showed Rosie, impossibly, still half asleep on his arm. It showed the moment Thomas was pulled clear and Sargent shook himself dry. Patricia posted it to a local community group with a simple caption: "The dog that was struck with a crop at this afternoon's event is the same dog that saved a child's life an hour later. His name is Sargent. He is a retired Canadian Forces military working dog. His owner served 2 tours. Just thought people should know." She did not name Constance. She didn't need to. By Sunday evening, 17,000 people had shared the clip. By Monday morning, 2 journalists had reached out to the Gary Oak Event Committee. By Tuesday, the community foundation boards on which Constance sat had received a combined 400 emails. By Wednesday, Constance had resigned from both. By Thursday, Albright Property Management had issued a statement expressing deep regret for the actions of its owner and announcing a donation, unprompted by anyone, which is how you know when damage control has become genuine panic, to the BCSPCA Military Animals Fund. Logan read the statement on his phone at the kitchen table. Sargent was lying on the floor beside him with his chin on Logan's boot. Logan put the phone down. He said nothing about it, to no one, which was consistent with his overall approach. There is a particular kind of person who mistakes quiet for weakness, who mistakes discipline for absence, who looks at a man walking calmly with a dog and sees only the dog. They forget, always, that the calm is trained, that the stillness is chosen, that everything you can see is only the surface of something that goes much, much deeper. And there is a particular kind of dog who does not need to prove anything, who has already been to the places where proof is required, who has already earned what cannot be taken. On the last Friday of Logan's leave, Claire hosted dinner. Her house in Saanich, which was always slightly too warm and always smelled like something baking, and always had Rosie's drawings taped to every vertical surface. Logan arrived at 6:30. Sargent walked in without ceremony and went directly to the kitchen, where he sat beside the counter with the quiet expectation of a creature who had learned that kitchens were where good things originated. Patrick poured wine. Claire checked on something in the oven. Rosie appeared from the hallway in her pajamas and announced that she had already had dinner, which no one believed. "Sargent saved my life," Rosie informed Logan very seriously. "Thomas's life," Logan said. "I was there," Rosie said. "He saved me too, just in general." Logan sat down at the table. "Logan," Claire said, from the kitchen, "the foundation called me." He looked at her back. "The Gary Oak Event Foundation. They want to make Sargent an honorary participant in next year's event. Sort of an ambassador. They want to put his photo on the program." "He doesn't do publicity," Logan said. "He saved a child's life. He was doing his job, Logan." He was quiet. "Can you please," Claire said, turning from the stove, "for once in your life, let something nice happen to you without arguing about it?" Logan looked at Sargent. Sargent was looking at the stove. "I'll think about it," Logan said. Claire turned back to the stove. "That means yes," she told Patrick. "I know," Patrick said. Logan left Victoria on a Tuesday, early flight. Sargent was going back to the house in Esquimalt, a rental, practical, sparse, a backyard with a fence, in the care of a neighbor who had been briefed extensively and had taken notes. Logan stood in the doorway with his kit bag and looked at Sargent for a moment. Sargent looked back. He didn't whine. He didn't press against Logan's leg. He sat straight-backed, amber eyes forward, with the self-possession of a creature who understood, at some level, that waiting was also a kind of service. "I'll be back," Logan said. This was more words than he gave most people. He scratched behind Sargent's ear once. Firm. Deliberate. Then he turned and walked down the path and did not look back, because looking back was the one thing he'd trained himself out of. The program for the following year's Gary Oak Preserve Charity Classic featured, on its inside cover, a photograph of Sargent mid-stride, taken during the junior fun run, with Rosie running beside him, both of them caught in that particular moment when motion looks like joy. Beneath the photograph, in recognition of Sargent, retired Canadian Forces military working dog and all those who serve without seeking recognition. True character needs no announcement. It only needs the moment. Constance Albright was not on the program. She was not on the board. She was not in the tent. Some things, once lost, do not return. Because the world eventually pays attention. Logan was 3 months into his next deployment when he received a photo by email from Claire. Just a photo. No message. It was Rosie on a Saturday morning, sitting on the kitchen floor of the Saanich house, with Sargent's head in her lap and her hand resting between his ears. The dog's eyes were closed. The girl was reading a picture book out loud, her lips moving slightly. Logan looked at the photo for a long time. Then he closed his email and went back to work. Some things you carry with you. Not because they're heavy, because they make the weight of everything else feel smaller. And Sargent waited, the way good things wait, patient, steady, certain that he would come home.